So to talk about the energy transition path of success in Africa, I could not have had a better panel with me. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Secretary General Dr. Ibrahim.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dan Evans, who you have all heard from, he's Oil Markets VP for S&P Global. Mr. Dosso, Managing Director for African Energy Bank, and Wang, Director for Strategy for Benchmarks for S&P Global. And I'm Ashutosh Singh. I head Energy Transition, and I have the extreme honor of moderating this panel. So maybe I can start with you, Dr. Ibrahim. First of all, congratulations on the journey from APPO to APPO. That was very exciting to hear. And also, as Dan mentioned in our earlier presentation, that oil and gas will remain will play a key role, not just in Africa, but overall in the global economy for a long time to come. With that in mind, you talked a little bit about the creation of coordination between APPO members and the ecosystem. Could you talk a little bit more on what to expect in the next couple of years and how you're thinking of improving that coordination and creating a more integrated ecosystem between APPO members?
Thank you very much. Like I said, we have come to the realization that individually, African countries cannot make the progress that they need to make in order to be able to be classified as developed countries. But when we come together and pool our resources together, we will be able to move and move very fast. I've mentioned our efforts at creating regional centers of excellence in oil and gas industry. And beyond that, we are also working on ensuring that we have integrated the energy markets on the continent. I mentioned CAPS. Beyond CAPS, we are also looking at the West Africa and East Africa region, and then the Southern African region. We can't do much without political commitment on the part of our political leaders. But that is not to say that all of this must be driven by government. No. Beyond the NOCs, we are also looking at the possibility, very soon, of bringing private operators in the industry. When you go to some APPO member countries, you see that their private operators, some of them, are even stronger in terms of capital, in terms of technology, in terms of expertise, than some NOCs. And you can't completely sideline these operators. This is something we are working on, and we expect that in the next few years, hopefully when the Africa Energy Bank is operational, and we have also, and by the way, what Mr. Zakaria didn't say is that we are looking to raising funds for the Africa Energy Bank, not limited to Africa. We are open to investment from every part of the world, Middle East, Asia, even Europe, provided that you share our vision that the oil and gas industry has a future until at least the energy poverty-stricken parts of the world are able to get the basic energy that they need. Once you share this vision with us, then you are welcome to participate in the bank. But we are not going to open our doors to those that have a lot of money that will come and hijack the bank and make it impossible for us to be able to achieve our vision of the bank.
So you made a very good point that the sharing of vision that oil and gas will remain a key part for a long time in the future. And Dan, maybe I can bring you on that front. You talked about the role of oil and gas. Even in our different scenarios, in the base case, we expect about 60% energy mix will come from oil and gas. In the green rule or net zero cases, we'll have 35-40%. Still a pretty significant share. If you can relate that, what that looks like in Africa specifically, and are we investing enough in Africa currently to meet that kind of energy share for oil and gas 20 years down the road?
Yeah, I think, are we investing enough? No, definitely not, right? But I think there's a huge opportunity to start making those investments, and initiatives like you've both discussed are a big step forward in making that happen. In terms of the role for oil and gas in Africa, right, I think we see it as being hugely important for the continent's development, right? You talked about, 900 million people without access to, modern energy. I mean, you don't have to go too far, right, to see people still using firewood, right, for cooking and heating. Half the population of big cities like Lusaka and Harare. So making that transition even away from biomass towards things like LPG, and then developing more is going to be critical, right? So I think we see oil and gas being a really important part of Africa's energy development, and the key is to make sure that the investments that are being made, as you say, not just for the benefit of the export markets, but for the benefit of African countries, African consumers.
So we are not investing enough, and we need to invest for the domestic market. And that's where probably I would like to bring Mr. Dosso with the announcement of African Energy Bank. I'm thinking you're trying to bridge that gap of underinvestment now. Is there a role of concessional financing involved in there? And are you also thinking of partnering with multilateral banks like World Bank or Africa Development Bank?
There is a traditional model of financing the sector, but the trends, because of this energy transition, is making difficult to direct funding to the hydrocarbon, especially in Africa. So the traditional financial institution, I think they have their new policy, and some of the policy are not in line with what is good for our country in terms of developing the hydrocarbon sector. We have so many countries, the economy are dependent on oil and gas. And what we are thinking now, it is to have, as I say, a capability controlled by us, which can have the basis of the financing, and also can be a sort of facilitator to go to other institutions, to other investors, because the energy bank we are establishing now, we have to tell us the truth, cannot fully resolve the funding problem. But it has to have a great role to start resolving the problem. And being on ground now, it can go to other players in the financing sector, like Afreximbank itself, like other Africa Energy Corporation. I know my friend from AGDA has been always saying that, why are we not putting on the same table the financier to work about the funding issue? This Africa Energy Bank can be the one who can now try to gather on the same table the financier, even regional financier in Africa, even outside Africa, since his mission is clear to finance the development of the financing sector. So it can be innovative financing system.
Yep.
It can be traditional way also. But,
very interesting. So if I can come back to you, Dr. Ibrahim, and your background with working with NNPC and OPEC, you have seen sort of the value chain of oil and gas, and we are in a business where production declines over time, and we need to keep investing in exploration and to find new discoveries, and it takes, if you discover something now, it takes 10 years 5-7 years to develop that. How are APPO members thinking of incentivizing investment, especially in exploration and finding new discoveries in Africa?
Like I said, funding the industry today, especially in the upstream, is a big challenge. But I think given what is happening, especially since 2015, we are not just looking at the economics of oil and gas industry. If we consider, and I believe we consider, energy as a strategic commodity, then we have to define energy access as a matter of priority, as a matter of national security. If we do that, and we're thinking about that, then whatever resources we need to put in to get that resource out will be done. You're not just going to look at it in terms of will it be profitable immediately or not. Let's face it, all the developed countries of the world today, they can talk about free market, etc. But the reality is they always define what they consider to be their national interest. And in the pursuit of that national interest, the question of profit or loss doesn't come in. They go for it and protect what they consider to be national interest. It has come to the time that in Africa, we consider energy access as a question of critical importance, priority, of national or continental interest. And I think relying on foreign investors, if they come, like I said, under our terms, fine. But the earlier we began to look within for the solution to our challenges, the better for us.
That makes sense. Dan, you have a comment?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I found really interesting about what your presentation was your discussion around this CAPS project, right? And this idea that countries are not just following their own path, but there is regional integration, that countries are partnering with the same objectives. Do you see that as something that has changed, something that is new, something that's necessary for the kind of development that you're talking about?
Absolutely. The point is, if there hasn't been that change in the way these countries and their peoples see the challenge, I don't think we would even have sat down to conceive of this project and taken it to the level that we have today. I believe next month, on this 8th or 9th, we are going to be meeting in Jamena to take this forward. And this is going to be not just at ministerial, but even at head of state level. So that tells you the commitment that these countries have for this project. Seriously speaking, no one African country today, apart from a number of especially in sub-Saharan Africa, can effectively tell us that it can put the right infrastructure on the ground to be able to provide its population the required energy. Because in some of these places, it just doesn't make economic sense. However, like I said, if we put our resources together, we will be able to do it, and we should not be looking at just the next 5 years. Look at the next generation. What sacrifices are we making as leaders today in order to make life better for our grandchildren, not even our children?
So it's a strategic commodity, and we need to invest regardless of energy transition in Africa. I would like to bring Mr. Dosso, if you can make a comment about how do we improve. Of course, we need to think about oil and gas is a strategic commodity, but how do you still improve the risk-return profile in the country in Africa so that you invest from within, but also foreign capital flows in along with internal investment? Do you think there are some policies that need to be changed? Do we think the fiscal terms in different countries need to be changed? Or is there anything specific that needs to happen?
If I get really your question, because how are we going to invest in our African countries?
Yeah, how do you invite more foreign capital in Africa?
Yes.
And how do you improve the risk-return profile for investment in African countries?
Okay, I understand, yeah. You know, first of all, it is to bring capital anywhere, it is a perception of risk and also return. I think the most things that matters, the risk you are taking and return. Sometimes return is tied to risk also. So, unfortunately, Africa, in terms of evaluation of the risk, generally is done by rating, international rating outside. That's why also African Union has decided to establish a rating, African rating firm also. So we can have the right perception of African risk also. I think it's very, very important for that also. And the second is the return, and your presentation also supports that. African is a place where the return is higher also. I think it is a matter of design the things so that it can be attractive, reassuring, and displaying the right situation. I think the risk should be very well managed, I agree with that, but it should be very well assessed also. Because the perception outside Africa they have about the risk in Africa is not good, and we have to correct that also. Yeah. And if we have the right perception of African risk, I think it is one point that can attract investors. I'm not saying the risk is not higher in some places in Africa, but I like also outside Africa, there are places where the risk is higher than in Africa also. Fiscal regulation, policy regulation also can play a great role. I agree with that to attract our investors. And I think it is a sort of competition among countries. Some are revamping the regulation so that it can be very, very competitive. And I think our countries are very well working on that also.
Yeah, yeah. If I can, you have a comment, Dr. Ibrahim?
Please, let me just, whenever questions are asked about investment in Africa, I get worried with the kind of responses I get. We have accepted that there has been a global paradigm shift away from fossil fuels to renewable energies. We have accepted that energy transition has come and it has got to move on. We have also accepted that this paradigm shift has brought with it some challenges to a number of accepted ways of doing things. Like to Africa, I mentioned the 3 challenges: finance, technology, markets. But when we are asked, how do you handle the finance? Every academic, every expert I have heard speak tells me that make the environment a lot more environmentally friendly so that foreign investors will come. They tell me you need to reduce your taxes, increase your... Look, I don't believe that there is anything you can do that if it goes against the dogma of those who believe that energy, fossil fuels must end. Well, let me ask you a question. If in Africa today, our fossil fuels, anybody who invests in fossil fuel today will make double the profit that he or she will make in any other part of the world. and we say, come and invest, will the institutions that have been investing in the past, before the energy transition, will they come and invest here? They would love to, but they cannot come because their governments will not allow them to come. And if they do come, there will be sanctions for coming. So I don't believe that it is that free for you to come in, no matter how much you make it environmentally free, no matter how much you try to strangulate your government in order to create an environment, they won't. For as long as it is ideologically driven or dogma driven, you will only continue to reduce what you're supposed to get from your resources.
So you're saying Africans' problems need to be solved from within Africa rather than looking outside of Africa. And
primarily so, but I am not foreclosing, because in every society, look, we just came back from Canada last month. We went and we are looking at the possibility of discussing with institutions that have excelled in oil and gas technology to help us with the development of our centers of excellence in oil and gas. So we are not condemning the West completely, no. We know that with these various regions, there are those that you can work with to make progress. But the dominant opinion in those societies are against us. Let's face it.
I think you make a very good point that energy transition and the path will look very different from what energy transition will look in developed countries. And there are a lot of opportunities in Africa. And Dex, you talked about benchmarks and how Western African crudes are actually can demand a premium by solving a few things that sort of determine that grade. And that goes back to the risk and return profile. If you can demand a premium for your crude, you technically improve the risk return profile of your projects. Looking maybe 20 years, 10 years down the future, how do you see that sort of benchmark and crude grade evolve? And is Africa sort of better positioned competitively compared to other grades around the world?
Yeah, I think when we analyze the competitive advantages or disadvantages of crudes, we still have to put it in the context of an international crude oil market. For better or worse, majority of Africa's crude will still need to be exported in the foreseeable future. You will not build your domestic, when I say domestic, I mean African refining capacity in a very fast way. It's going to come, but in the foreseeable future, majority is exported to the international market, for which will be judged by the international mainstream ways. One of the factors, I think, would be carbon intensity in the next few years, which will become a major factor in investors' decision-making in terms of whether they want to put more money into your production. And I think at this moment, we're seeing the African crudes to be relatively light and relatively sweet, meaning the production costs, the processing costs for refiners will be relatively low. And producing this crude from the ground is also relatively less expensive, relatively less energy intensive. In that sense, African crudes, as it stands, I would say it has an above average carbon intensity advantage, meaning it's less carbon intensive compared with some other crudes. For example, Canadian oil sands, which are very, very energy intensive to produce. Then if you think about even longer term, how do you make it better? Then you have to think of all the ways to reduce your existing already relatively good carbon intensity, meaning how do you want to deal with flaring? How do you want to deal with all the associated gas that you can't flare? Do you sell them, or do you use as fuel to do more production? All of which may theoretically reduce your carbon intensity and make your crude more attractive to international investors. So I think even if your crude is right now is relatively good, there's always ways to make it better, and in the process, making your crude more valuable to your buyers, because the buyers may eventually have to pay a premium to buy less carbon-intensive crudes. We believe carbon intensity may eventually become as important as API and sulfur in valuing crudes.
So already there are some unique advantages, and it can get better. So that's a very positive, optimistic future. But before we get to the optimistic future, Dan, going back to your slide where you were showing that refined product demand is a small box, but it's going to become a much bigger box in the next 10, 20 years. How do you think African nations should think about investing in the infrastructure to meet that demand, and what are some of the key 1 or 2 or 3 steps that needs to be taken?
I mean, I think we would probably argue that African refined product demand is supply constrained, right? There's a lot of pent-up demand there, and the problem is really access to energy, access to affordable energy. One of the reasons I was really interested in this CAPS project is just because, you know, regional integration between the countries on the coast and countries inland is going to be critical, I think, to unleashing that demand. And, you know, frankly, many countries are not sufficiently material to justify making some of these investments, infrastructure investments by themselves. They need to be looked at from a regional perspective or from a supply corridor perspective, so that it's not just a coastal country investing in its port for itself, it's investing in that for the whole region, the countries that are inland. And so this idea of greater regional cooperation, cooperation between producing countries and consuming countries is I think really, really critical. And better infrastructure is going to, you know, really unleash the potential of the continent's energy demand, I think.
Could you talk a little bit about how you are thinking of improving that coordination between producer countries and consumer countries, and trying to interlink the market in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa?
This is beyond just economics, like I said. It's also political, and I believe sometime next year, hopefully, we are yet to confirm the exact date, but the African Petroleum Producers Organization is going to hold the first summit of heads of state of APPO member countries in Brazzaville, hopefully in the first quarter of next year. And this project that I talked about and others in other regions of the continent are the issues that are going to be discussed. So when we have the political support, then we create the foundation for the entrepreneurs, business people, to go into that. We are working. Please, I might not come back to, but let me say something about carbon intensity. Please, ladies and gentlemen, all of us have come to believe that the world has got to do something about emissions. Those who did the emissions are telling us that those who didn't, that join us, because this planet is a common patrimony for everybody. The rich, the poor, those who are guilty of emitting, as well as those who are not. But we all have to come together to put a stop. And funny enough, all of us, including African leaders, have agreed. They've gone and signed. And we are told, minimize, if not you can't stop it, just minimize the use of fossil fuels. Ladies and gentlemen, without fossil fuels, will the developed countries of today have been where they are today? No. Is what they are suggesting today the best way or the only way to go about it? I don't think so. There are other options that they have carefully avoided putting on the table because they don't want anybody to do that. And one option is this. Ladies and gentlemen, in the last 150 years, 2,500 megatons of emissions have been put into the atmosphere, mostly by the industrialized countries. Africa, they say we contributed 3%. Without that figure, but even if it's 3%, let it be. Ladies and gentlemen, there are technologies, CDR, carbon dioxide removal technologies, that if developed and deployed, you can actually extract a lot of the emissions you have put there in the last 150 years, so that that carbon intensity or density in the atmosphere will be reduced. In my opinion, the idea of climate fund, 100 billion every year, Africans are rushing to get it. Stop that nonsense. That 100 billion, whether you call it climate fund for mitigation or adaptation or loss and damage, look, take that money, since you did this mess, take that money, develop that technology, and in the next 25 years, extract the emissions, just 500 out of the 2,500, and go and bury it somewhere. When you do that, when you take the 500, that will give Africa and other developing countries the opportunity to emit maybe 150, maybe 200. And if we emit 200 in the next 50 years, believe me, you will bring about equity in the world, because there wouldn't be a big gap between those that have it and those that do not have. We will be able to have access to energy. And once we have access to energy, the living conditions of our people will change. One of the biggest problems of the world today is that of inequality. And unless we are able to do this, and seriously, I've said that several times, the developed countries are not ready to do this technology, because if they do, they will continue to depend on fossil fuels which they do not have control over. It's a matter of energy security. Let's face it.
The access to energy and energy security are key, and over the history of our civilization, improvement in lifestyle and development is linked to access to energy. And for the developed countries to even think about Africa not taking part into developing the endowment they are bestowed with, I don't think that's imaginable. So definitely oil and gas has a big future for Africa, and an interlinked market will play a big role in providing domestic market for the refined products. If I can ask Mr. Dosso, you mentioned you'll have $5 billion, and I'm assuming you'll invest that money across the oil value chain and not just in upstream. Could you talk a little bit about the sectors that you're looking to invest in the oil and gas value chain?
As I said, we are intending to invest in all the industry targeting the development of the sector. So that means exploration, production. That means storage, transportation, refinery, all the value chain. So upstream, downstream, midstream. So look at, for example, when we were painting, we are doing the painting of Africa, for example. Then focus generally more on refinery capacity, demand. For example, we are over 6 billion in terms of demand now. In terms of capacity installed, I read, for example, in 2021, in terms of capacity, we were about 3.7 billion daily. But this is installed capacity. This is not used capacity.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe it's that little bit increase, but I'm sure we'll be below 6 billion daily in terms of youth capacity. But if you have a demand over 6 billion, for example, we have to invest since we have a good quality of crude oil. Why not profiting this good quality of oil here, creating job also? And when you say creating additional refinery, that means also storage. That means also facility for transportation. We need that also.
A lot of that will be linked to the local jobs. It will offer local jobs. It will offer development.
Exactly.
So it's all interlinked. I'll open the floor for question in about 2-3 minutes. So if you have questions, please be ready. Dan, I want to come back to you on the potential for a refined product, not just for refineries for domestic use, but also Africa could be a destination for competing with other grades in Asia and in Europe, especially with Russian barrels now out of the market and moving towards Asia. So it's not just a domestic success, could not just be a domestic success story, but also export market.
Yeah, I mean, I think Africa is definitely interesting for other regions as an export market. But I think we definitely see the opportunity to kind of keep investing in the African refining system. And I guess a question that I have for you is sort of, given the investment opportunities along the value chain, how are you prioritizing between investments? Is it purely on the returns, or is it kind of taking into account some of the bigger picture strategic thinking that the Secretary General's been talking about?
The question is asked for the energy bank, or?
Yeah. I mean,
maybe I didn't mention it. The energy bank will be a institution which will focus on profit also. Yeah. So it will not be an institution providing loan without calculating risk and getting profit. It will be an institution which is also targeting to get profit. And doing so also we attract investors to put their money. And in terms of management also, we're going to attract talent so that the governance structure, the management team, so that it can be properly managed, so that return will be very important. I'm talking about the organization Energy Bank. Yeah. It should be a profitable institution.
And you mentioned talent, and if Africa has to develop its oil and gas resources for the long term, developing internal talent is key. You mentioned in your talk about technologies. What are some of the key steps you're thinking of how to build a sort of center of excellence and have internal skilled manpower?
Yeah, I did mention that we took a tour of these institutions that we have in our member countries. We are yet to agree on which ones, but I also did mention that we are looking into a partnership with institutions in the developed countries that have really excelled in the oil and gas industry to help us with this. And secondly, really, there are a number of Africans that are in the diaspora, in Europe and America, that are in this industry, that have excelled in this industry, that if we create the enabling environment for them to come to work here, they will be very happy to do that. What we need to do is create the enabling environment. Unfortunately for us today, in many African countries, we send our experts, our students, our workers to Europe and America to enhance their education. 70% of them don't come back. Sometimes you don't blame them. It's human nature. We need to work on that. And these are some of the things that at the Summit of Heads of State will be discussed and see what needs to be done to give priority to creating the environment for these people to come back.
So keep an eye out for more exciting news to come next year. Are there any questions in the room? Please. The gentleman in the front. Could you announce who you are and who you are with, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Ellison Karahanga. I'm a lawyer in Uganda, and I'm in a law firm called Kampala Associated Advocates. And I think it's a great honor to be here and to listen to the presentations. I think as I listen to the Secretary General and the Managing Director and all you guys, I think there are a number of important things and important takeaways. I think no one can argue with the fact that there's an energy crisis in Africa, not just a climate crisis. I think no one can argue with the fact that many an African use less energy than a fridge in the West, a refrigerator in the West, or that the African average consumption of power is about 185 kilowatt hours compared to 12,000 kilowatt hours in the United States. My question to you, though, with regard to the Africa Energy Bank is, how do you encourage or interest African development finance institutions? We have like the Trade and Development Bank, and we have a number of African development finance institutions and African pension funds to invest that are not just members of APPO. Secondly, how do you expand the membership of APPO? And thirdly, the question on the carbon intensity that you had spoken about. There's all this measure about, what do they call them? End user emissions. And that entire talk about emissions. When you talk about emissions with regard to fossil fuels, don't we always get lost in some of these terms? People say, how do you measure
We have limited time, so I'll cut you off right there. But
I'll stop. Thank you very much.
If you could talk about how to increase the membership of APPO, and if you can take the African Energy Bank question, and Dex, if you can comment on carbon intensity.
Okay, I will start maybe. I thank you for your question. We are also targeting regional financial institutions to be member of the bank and invest also. So very important. How do we attract them? We have already a business plan already. I know you know that. And in the business plan, I'm sure the data in the business are very attractive. When they will see that, they will be very, very keen to invest. In terms of example, for example, the 5 coming here, we have a progress of the return on equity from 11% to 19%, for example, which is an example. And based on the 2 presentations, you saw that we have a great opportunity investing in oil and gas industry in Africa. You saw that. So we have the figures in the business plan of Africa Energy Bank, and the figures are very, very attractive. So I'm sure we'll start after commencement of the signature of the funding document of the bank, we start also discussing with the regional financial institution, share the relevant document with them to invest quickly. Some have already approached us because they say they wanted to be part of the project also. So,
Dr. Ibrahim.
Let me add on to what Zakaria has said. Beyond looking for funds from so-called international investors, I've said that we are going to work to see what we can raise from within. You will say, but you guys are poor. Where are you going to get the money from? Look, there is at any given time what you call windfall in terms of oil pricing. One of the things we plan to place before our presidents is that let's accept a certain amount as the standard price for a barrel. Anything beyond that, we consider it as a windfall. A certain percentage of that windfall should be dedicated to the industry. So if we say that $65 or $70 is the price of oil for 2024, and the price goes to $90, $20 per barrel is the windfall. We will now have to agree on what percentage of that $20 is going to be put in the funds for the development of the oil and gas industry over the next 15 years. And if you remember that we are producing today about 7 million plus barrels, then you have an idea of what kind of money we are going to make and put in that thing. As to the expansion of membership drive, I want to say that since the reform of APPO in 2020, we have brought in 3 new member countries: Namibia, Ghana, and Senegal. And we have another 4 in the pipeline to join us within very soon. It's a political, I don't know when, but very soon. So we are working to ensure that as many oil and gas producing and potential producing countries have joined us. Because at the end of the day, what is important is that, particularly with the Africa Energy Bank, we are going to focus more on the development of cross-border and regional energy infrastructure. We're not going to focus so much on what you do inside your country. If you're going to do something in your country, then that thing must, the benefit must go beyond your country. If you're going to have a refinery, for example, that refinery should make it possible for you to be able to export to our neighboring countries. Thank you.
So APPO membership is on the expansion. Dex, we're out of time, but if you can cover maybe in 10 seconds and answer the question.
Okay. I'm standing between you and the drinks. So carbon intensity, depending on who you're asking, in each of the value chain, it's very different. When we talk about scope 1 to 3, my scope 3 could be your scope 2. So you really have to be specific. If we're talking about refinery, scope 1 is the carbon emission that's directly involved in your operation. Scope 2 is outsourced, electricity, energy supplied to you from others. Scope 3 is the gasoline that's going to be burned by the end user. And the majority of the IOCs and some of the NOCs have promised or pledged to be carbon neutral in terms of entire life cycle carbon emission by 2050, which, if you look at it right now, it's almost impossible. So be careful about what people pledge.
Thank you. So with that, let me quickly summarize. Oil and gas, we should think about, in Africa, we should think about as strategic commodities and leverage the domestic market, the vast domestic market that's on offer here. And APPO is working hard on creating the political will and interconnection of these markets. So with that, please join me in thanking this awesome panel. And thank you.